and workshops on OSINT and on doing, using Bitcoin, and we do some work with the government and with some law enforcement to help bring them up to speed with the new world of cybercrime. So two of the main terms we're going to be talking about here are doxing and swatting, so I wanted to set them in context for this talk. When I talk about doxing, I mean having somebody's information, typically their private information, and then posting it in a public forum, and then telling people to go look at it and use this information for nefarious purposes. Usually it includes the full name, current physical address, email addresses, usernames, phone numbers, and pictures. Sometimes it'll include things like social security numbers, bank account and routing information, and then all of this information about people that they're tied to, like their friends and family. And then from that information, something that can happen, and unfortunately does happen, is swatting, where a SWAT team is deployed to a house based on a false call, and that house is usually the target for harassment. So why do we care about doxing? Well, there's sort of a hierarchy of things to care about here. It's, there's some basic things that can happen that are annoying but easy to deal with, like having people give you prank calls or send you prank messages to the information that was released. Also getting some gray marketing or people trying to scam you. And then the next level would be like having something you didn't want out there. Maybe you have a hobby that you really want to keep to yourself and to your closed forums, but having that outed can sometimes be damaging. And then online and in-person harassment, bullying, stalking, and then identity theft, usually financial identity theft in this case. And then of course having a SWAT team bust down your door sucks, so that's definitely a danger. And then being targeted for physical attack, either yourself or your property, which we'll see examples of that later. So it's the online stuff is tough to deal with, but it's the in-person stuff that gets really scary. Even if they're not attacking you personally, they can do a lot to harm your way of life or damage you. One of the things, if they have your physical address, they can go and slash your tires. So that's something you really, really don't want to happen because it causes, slashing tires. So, those are all sort of theoretical things that can happen, but I want to get into some real cases to make it tangible. The first one I want to talk about, this was during the Boston bombings, when Reddit and 4chan decided to be the internet police and do some amazing detective work. So one of the people that they outed as being a prime suspect for the bomber in Boston was Sunil Tripathi, which, surprise, surprise, he was brown. And so he had been missing since March 16th, and he was not only identified as a really good target for being the bomber on 4chan and Reddit, but a lot of news services picked it up. And when they started repeating it, it lended a false sense of credibility to the claim. So his family started receiving death threats, and his family's and his personal information was released online. They were targeted both in person and digitally. So what had really happened here was Sunil Tripathi was missing because he had committed suicide before the bombings took place. And his body was later found in the Providence River. So his family was not only having to deal with the death of their son, but they were having to deal with all of this harassment and death threats. Another example where doxing went awry is where Amanda Todd, online, she took her life after a long history of being blackmailed and stalked online. And so Anonymous wanted to play White Knight and find out who did it and make them pay. Again, they doxed the wrong person. So the person that they doxed, they also included a lot of his business information. So his boss eventually told him, look, you need to make this stop, which of course he can't, or you're going to be fired. He ended up getting fired from his job because of the harassment. And eventually it became so bad he had to move across the country and legally change his name. So that's his complete, all of his life just, uprooted because of this false doxing. Another person and their mother who got caught up in this doxing craze was when Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson. Anonymous, again, wanted to find out who the police officer was that shot him. They ended up doxing somebody that had never had any dealings with the Ferguson police. And they ended up not only doxing him, but his mother as well. And they were able to get things like social security numbers and maiden names. So what happened was a lot of credit cards and bank accounts, lines of credit, things like that were opened up in their name. And they're still cleaning up all of that ID theft fraud that they had to deal with. And of course, their scores are, in the trash. So all of that is, it's difficult to deal with, but there isn't necessarily an immediate sense of danger. But something that does cause that immediate sense of danger is having a group of heavily armed people bust in your door, perhaps at 3 a.m. without a knock, and having guns and lights waved in your face where you're a little groggy. Either you or your dog might very well end up getting hurt in that situation. Or if you sleep next to weapons, one of the officers might end up getting hurt. So you can see a lot of examples of swatting happening live from various online gamers that were playing a game against somebody or a group of people, and somebody they were playing with or somebody who was watching them took offense to either something they said or them just being alive in general, and then calls on the SWAT team to their house after doxing them. During Gamergate, which is kind of still going on, a lot of the proponents of opening up gaming as a lifestyle and as a recreation to a broader demographic became targets of doxing and swatting as well. And there are a number of stories online about this. There's also Ashton Kutcher got doxed like 7 times, and he's been swatted multiple times. Brian Krebs has, but that's not really surprising given what he does for a living. And because he makes a job out of pissing off skiddies, so. But both Ashton Kutcher and Brian Krebs had some success in protecting themselves against swatting, and I'll talk about how they did that later. Now, if you're a real chicken shit and you don't want to do it yourself, there is a new SaaS, that's Swatting as a Service. And this is on one of the darknet websites. If you pay $100 within 10 days, this guy will get the SWAT team to bust into the target of your choice. So you think, is this a real service? Do people actually use this? Turns out it has really good ratings. So these are actually pretty recent. People saying, hey, it actually worked. He actually got the cops to come. Delivered as promised. I wasn't tracked. He's very good at what he or she does. Yep. Terrible human being. All right. So it's not just a Western phenomenon, right? So we see analogs for doxing both in Asia and in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet bloc. So in China, it's typically referred to as the human flesh search engine. And it started out as a collaborative meat research on mass scale. And what they would do initially is they would look for evidence of people who are officials in power that have been taking bribes, or they look for people who have been falsifying their information in their research, which is a big problem in China right now. And it started out as that sort of like, we want to do this good, but we need other people to do it with us. So I know somebody who works here, you know somebody that works there, we'll get a little bit of information there and here and put it together. But it started turning after a while and being used to out people who didn't need to be outed or were outed incorrectly. It was also used to turn minor internet celebrities into objects of stalking and fixation. It's that two-edged sword that we see in all of the cases of doxing. For the Russian and former Soviet bloc, it is almost exclusively focused on getting information about celebrities. And for some reason, rap celebrities are huge, especially their cell phone numbers. They're worth quite a bit on the underground markets. And they're traded typically like baseball cards. One guy will say, hey, I have this celebrity and this celebrity's information, but I want this. I'll trade with you if you have it. So in China, this is an example of what's called a Watch Uncle campaign. And what they do is they find officials who are officiating over typically very, very small areas or poor areas that have flashy watches. And these officials tend to wear a different flashy watch for each day of the year. On their salary, they obviously should not be able to afford these watches. So what they do is they go online and try to find evidence or pictures of these guys wearing really, really expensive watches. And you can see that this particular bright student of this online campaign decided, before anybody could take my picture, I got to take off my watch. Turns out the sun burned him around his watch area, so that didn't really work out for him.
What's circle at the bottom?
So that's showing where there's a bulge in his pocket where the watch is. So this is the other side of that, and that this is an innocent taxi owner. What happened was a taxi drove by in a town in China and rolled down his window and spat on a homeless person that was on the side of the road. A couple of the eyewitnesses were only able to get a partial license plate number, and unfortunately this taxi owner's license plate matches that partial, but of course they can't know the rest. And he was outed as being the most likely candidate, so of course in everybody's mind he was the person that did it. He had red paint thrown all over his house, death threats written to him almost daily, telling him that they're going to ruin his business and he better move out of the city, and things like that, which unfortunately, here he is saying, like, I'm innocent, that wasn't me that did it. And some really, really nice Eastern European guy put up this webpage for a while. It's not down, or it's not up on the ClearNet anymore, but he had collected a whole bunch of different people's, celebrities and well-known persons' information, including social security numbers, cell phone numbers, addresses, and he just posted them for free for everybody. So Britney Spears, Hulk Hogan, Donald Trump, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Octomom, in case you wanted to call her cell phone. So it's not only used against innocent people, it's also used between people on darknet and underground forums who are either at war with each other for some perceived slight or for market share in some form or another. So skids who like to proclaim themselves as being undoxable inevitably are the first ones to be doxed. And that's a big thing that you can see, and if you really have the constitution to sit and listen to them in their IRC forums, or IRC chants, or in their forums, they try and dox each other all the time. When Doxman was still up, and there are a couple other ones like it out now, it was just 14 and 13-year-olds left and right being doxed. It's also used to out-rival sellers and to get their market share. If, say, you have plastic for cloning credit cards, or a machine that you're selling on an underground forum for doing credit card cloning, then you want to get rid of all the other people who are also selling that product so you can up your price by cornering the market. And what you do is you end up doxing the other sellers and then find out where they live and give all of that doxing information and proof that they're selling things to their local police. That way they get caught and then you get to sell where they used to. It's also used as a response to people who are considered rippers or grifters. This is people who promise a service, like they're going to crypt your malicious file for you so it can't be detected by AV, and they go ahead and pay you, and then you don't deliver on your service. And then those guys get doxed left and right as well. It's also used on darknet markets, typically Tor markets, as a form of coercion to get you to finalize early. As a seller, you're giving up quite a bit of information about yourself in order to get a physical product. And if your OPSEC isn't good, which most of the buyers' OPSEC is terrible, then the vendor can turn around and say, look, I have all this information about you. I'll give it to the police unless you finalize early, and you don't get your product, but I get your money. It's also used as a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card. What happens is darknet market vendors will get all of this information on their buyers, and then when they eventually get pinched by the police, what they say is, hey, I've got all this information on all these people that were buying these illicit goods. If I turn informant and you let me go, I'll give you this information. All right, so how do they do this? How do they find all this information about us? Well, they, of course, start with the Googles. And they use what they call Google Foo, which is just really understanding Boolean and search operators. They'll typically start with a username or an email address, if they have one or the other, and then try to match all of the usernames that were used in conjunction with an email address, or all of the email addresses that were used in conjunction with a username. This allows them to get, find all kinds of different forums you were on. They'll also look for variations of usernames. Like if you were Sweetie Bunny 123, they would look for Sweetie Bunny or Sweetie Bunny 111. Go through all of those iterations. And if they could find other points that match to say that this account is also one of the accounts you use, then that's more information that they have. Also, when you put something online, it's really good to think about, am I okay with this being out there publicly forever and ever, amen? Because just because a website goes down, or that you've requested the information be removed, or you've deleted it, doesn't mean it's not still in the database backup, or in like the Wayback Machine, or Google Cache, or Corel Cache. So another place that they go to pretty immediately is social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. People put tons and tons of personal information out on those. Contact info, where they go, when they go. Family member information, who their friends are, their acquaintances, what their hobbies are, their skill sets, the jobs that they currently have and the places that they used to work, as well as who their colleagues are. This is all really, really good for social engineering. Also, it gives an idea of patterns of behavior, what places they go to regularly, things like that, and when they're not at home. Fuck you, Foursquare. Also, all of this information that you can get from social media is really good for building a database to be able to answer people's security questions, to reset their passwords, especially for their main email accounts. Because if you can reset that password, then you can get access to all the other accounts. Also, the things that we don't necessarily think about as social media, but are forums, groups like Yahoo groups, mailing lists, especially mailman mailing lists. A lot of times archiving is on by default on those. For the most popular forum frameworks, it asks you when you sign up for an account for your birth date, age, and location. A lot of people answer that truthfully. So then on your public profile, it lists, your birth date, your age, and your geolocation, how long you've been there, how many posts you've made, how often you post, things like that. Also, if you're in a forum that's maybe a weird or non-mainstream hobby, that may be something you want to keep on the down low, that's information that can get out as well. Also, it gives an idea of who you talk to a lot. So what usernames or email addresses online are you in conversation with often? That's really good to be spoofed and then used as a trust vector to get you to click on something malicious or get more information out of you. Also, a lot of these social media groups and forums are breached, or they will be breached at some point in the near future. There are a couple examples of this is just within the last year or so. Epic Games forums, CBS Photo, all of those accounts were breached. The My Freedom Smokes forum, Action Target and Law Enforcement Targets, Haynes. For some reason, somebody hacked VeggieTales. I don't know why they would do that. Twitch, I know why they would do that. Slack was a really interesting hack in that it's a chat mechanism, so there's a lot of good information that would be gained there, especially since people thought that their chats were private. And then those are all sort of like general forums. You might not be giving up too much juicy information there, but there are other places where a lot of people gave up really juicy information, like the Adult Friend Finder breach. So there was a lot of blackmailing that came out of that because it told not only who your online connections and partners were, but what sort of kinks you were into. So yeah, that one was bad, but probably not as bad as the Ashley Madison one. So I'm sure all of you are aware of this Ashley Madison hack. And while I don't feel too bad for the guys that were caught up in that, and the, 112 women that were caught up in it, then I do feel bad for their families, though, because there are groups of loosely affiliated with Anonymous kids who are going around and collating by location the accounts and their contact information and doxing them, and then contacting all of their friends and family and outing them as somebody who had an Ashley Madison account. Another place where you can get a lot of personal information about somebody is when they register a domain name. It asks you to enter in your real email address that you use, your physical location or the physical location of your business, your phone number, and then if you're still in the 90s, your fax number. There are also some tools that makes this easier. The Harvester is a really fun tool. So this one will allow you to go ahead and get a bunch of information on an entity or a particular individual, especially if you have the domain for their main email address. Multigo helps you not only with the transforms for searching, but to think about the relationships and connections differently. Creepy is a Python script that is creepy. It goes through and finds a bunch of information through the APIs of Facebook, through Foursquare, through Twitter, to get a lot of information that you can't typically get through the browser, but the API leaks. ReconNG is a really good framework for doing a lot of the things that some of these other tools do, but also being able to organize it in a way that's pretty conducive to really doxing somebody and building a good dossier. There's a few other tools. If you're interested in them, I can give you some links to other ones. There's one called OSINT Stalker. It has a Facebook stalker, which uses the Facebook Graph API, which even if you've really locked down your Facebook profile, it gets information through your friends and your friends of friends. It's able to build a profile about you through that. It also has an OSINT stalker, or a geo-stalker. And what that does is it goes through all of the APIs of social media platforms that use GPS data for where you are and what you're doing. And it'll collate that to build a pattern of where you go and when you go. Yeah?
Just real quick, you said that all these tools come under the general West End stalker.
Oh, no. So the last two I was talking about, the Facebook stalker and the geo-stalker, those are OSINT stalker, open source intelligence, OSINT.
Okay, OSINT stalker.
Yeah. And then ReconNG is another one that has a bunch of scripts that are similar to what the Harvester does, what Creepy does. So I would say OSINT Stalker and ReconNG are probably the two most powerful ones there. And another place to get a scary amount of information on individuals is through data brokers or data clearinghouses. I'm sure some of you have either seen the ads or tried to look up and then realized you had to pay even though it didn't look like it at first. To Spokio, Intellius, People, PQ, there are a bunch of them out there. And for free, typically you can get the full name, sometimes the maiden name, the age, the current and former addresses, and all of this information about their family members. The funny thing is, a lot of them try to only give you like a partial phone number for the person, but they all do it differently. So if you just go across them and get little bits of the phone number, you can get the whole one out of those parts. Also, if you pay more, then you get more information. You can get things like criminal records, school records, retail activity information. The retail activity information is interesting. When you go to a store and they ask you for your zip code and your phone number and that sort of information that really doesn't make sense for the type of purchase you're making, it's because a lot of times that information is bundled up and sold to third parties for targeted marketing. They're not really scrupulous about who they sell that to. As long as you got a bag of money, you can get that information. So Intellius, you can see they don't tell you what to use the data for. They just say, this is the types of data we'll give you at these different tiers of pricing. And of course, there's a special for first-time buyers.
You can be a first-time buyer every time, right?
Yes, you can. And Spokio is a little more specific about what their information is. This is one of their advertisements that's running right now. They say that they uncover personal photos, videos, and secrets guaranteed. You want to see something juicy? Spokio searches deep within 48 major social networks to find the truly mouth-watering news about friends and coworkers. Wow. Yeah. Luckily, I have a very common name, so it's great. It's very difficult, but it's not impossible to dox me. Public records, another huge place for getting information on people. They're a pain in the ass to go through. because a lot of them are using outdated systems, or the governments that are, local governments that are bringing these public records online they don't hire good UX, UI people. So when you are incorporating a business or buying a piece of property or a house, when you are registering for a patent or a trademark, they're going to ask you for a lot of information that is then made public. So it's information about your business partners, about your addresses and theirs, histories of business connections, and mappings to other entities that you've been involved with over time. There are even business websites that have cool little graphs that show you and the different buildings and people you're connected to and how you're connected to them. An example of a public record is this is a public record for a home in Buncombe County, North Carolina. And this is, anybody can go on the website for the county and look at this. It gives owner information, where they live, what their current address is, as well as the address of the property, how much the property is worth, how much it's sold for, the history of the property, and the history of the taxing. And something really interesting here is it gives ownership history in that you can see if it was just recently sold. And if a property was just recently sold, and you were posing as the person who just sold the property, I bet your target will open up any attachment you send to them through email. So it also gives information about the physical layout of the house, including square footage of each section. And a lot of times it'll tell you what the slope and grade is on the yard, things like that. So if somebody was planning on being a super creeper and stalking you, then now they have all the information they need to plan that out accordingly. Don't be scared. Other public records that give a lot of information about you when you give political contributions, if you're not being super sneaky and doing it through a super PAC, then it gives your name, address, your political affiliation, and the donation amounts. Especially with a history of donation amounts and some other information, you can have a pretty good shot at guessing somebody's income or net worth. Also petitions for recall, things like that. That gives name, geographic location, and again, fuel for social engineering if they know what you're passionate about. EXIF data, so sometimes called metadata. A lot of media, pictures, videos, audio, along with the actual stuff that you want, has attached to it on the back end information about the device or the program that was used to create it, times and dates when it was created or modified, and a lot of times GPS coordinates about when it was created. So an example of that is this is the information from a picture taken with a Nikon D300, and this is with its default settings on. It gives the time and date that the picture was taken, as well as the latitude and longitude of where the picture was taken. So this information isn't necessarily used for nefarious purposes all the time. It's also been used effectively to go ahead and send out drones to members of the Islamic State. Speaking specifically on EXIF data in media, Air Force General Hawk Carlisle said that it was a post on social media to bombs on target in less than 24 hours. So they were able to get the EXIF data from the social media account and use that to target them for a drone strike. Just because Facebook or Imager or Twitter doesn't show the EXIF data when they repost it, they sure as hell keep it in their database when you upload it. Another instance of it being used is when El Chapo, he's the leader of the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, his dumbass son, they're hiding in Central America, trying to run from the Mexican military. And his son took a picture of them all eating in Costa Rica and left GPS on. I bet he caught a beating for that. So social engineering is a big part of doxing as well. If you really want to get a lot of juicy information about somebody, calling their ISP or their phone company can get you some really good information, including call records, social security numbers, what their browsing history has been, all that sort of account login information. It's really effective, especially when they call posing as a spouse or a family member or a delegate. The people who are typically tier 1 for ISP and phone companies don't get trained very well on spotting phishing or social engineering. Also, calling current or former places of work, pretending that you are doing a background check or that you are a new place of work that is doing a reference check. You can get a lot of information out of people. Also, if you call their family posing as a friend or call their friends posing as a family member and pretend that there's an emergency with your target, that they're in mortal danger or they're hurt really bad, when those friends or family members go into panic mode, they don't tend to think critically about what sort of information that they're giving up.
Police department, third floor! Police department, third floor! What? Go! Third floor! Get down! With you! Need one!
With you? Hey, just relax, okay? We're on front of the couch, man.
Up, hun! Get up! On top of your head. Put your hands on top of your head.
Get me right here.
I got it.
Put it back.
We need one in the back!
Need one.
So that's swatting. So that technically was not a no-knock raid. They knocked on the door like 3 times before they smashed it in and threw something in there. And this is what is happening. You can see lots of other live recordings of it, either from the aspect of the SWAT team or from the aspect of the person actually being swatted while they're recording. It's pretty terrifying just to watch it. I can't imagine actually being in that situation. The way that it works when you call 911 is with a cell phone number, you're sending not only your voice information and your GPS information, but your ANI as well. With all of that information, including your PANI and your Phase 1 and Phase 2 location information, that goes through to the PSAP system, which checks the 911 database, and it's able to verify if you are actually where you say you are, or if you are actually calling from the number you say you're calling from. So it kind of weeds out people who are trying to spoof other people's numbers. And so what Phase 1 and Phase 2 location data is, it's a callback number, the tower ID that you're actually near. Hopefully you're not being routed through a Stingray device. And your estimated caller location, and it also gives a confidence value. So what that does is it confirms and validates the location, and it displays the location on the map for the dispatcher, and then it allows them to provide to the vehicles that are nearby routing information for where they should go. So when you want to call in a SWAT, and you'll obviously fail the confirmation if you call 911, what do you do to actually get the SWAT team in on somebody? You call the non-emergency line. They don't go through all that fancy stuff. They don't actually check to see if you're spoofing or not, or if you are who you say you are. So when you call the non-emergency line, they still operate as if it's an emergency, but it doesn't have all of the fancy tracking. Right? So how do we actually defend against this? Well, one of the first lines of defense is social media mindfulness. You don't have to constantly tell everybody where you are at all times, or everything about your private life online. So you can tighten a lot of your settings and controls on Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, and restrict your personal information. If you're South American, high five. And you want to vet your connection requests. LinkedIn is not Pokemon. You don't have to catch them all. You know, it's a really, really useful vector for finding a lot of information about a person or an organization. And if you go online right now, you can find research projects of people that are using it to out a bunch of people's secrets, especially confidential projects they're working on. Untagging yourself pretty judiciously online is something that's very effective. Just because you have good OPSEC does not mean that your friends do. So going in and when they tag you, untagging it, because that's what the Facebook Graph API uses, is tagging to find more information about you. Third-party apps, especially in Facebook. When you install a third-party app, the company that you installed it through does not necessarily own the rights to that app the next year or the year after that. They can sell that information, and they do, to other companies. And what it does is it not only gives information about your profile, but your friend's profile and your friends of friends. And that's very, very good marketing data, or it's data that's useful for somebody who's trying to dox you. You want to, of course, use strong passphrases. Wherever possible, please use two-factor authentication. Don't reuse passwords, and especially don't reuse passwords and the same usernames across accounts. I can't tell you how many of our retail, of our banking, of our hospitality customers constantly have automatic account checkers. Each time there's a new breach, they go and try a bunch of different sites with the same credentials that were dropped in that breach. And a lot of times they get into accounts that way. Also, your old accounts, your old dead journal or live journal that has painful things to read in it, you don't still need that publicly up and available. Download the information and take it offline. That's information that could definitely be used against you. Also, don't assume all info is removable. It's going to be on the internet in some form or another. There's a very good chance for a long time. And when a retail site asks you, hey, do you want me to save your credit card and location information for future purchases? That information goes into a database, 9 times out of 10 not secured very well. And that information is going to get breached or leaked at some point in time. And the people who work there have access to it. So for your whois information, when you register a new domain, you don't actually have to put your real information, just an email address that you can be contacted at. You can also use a third-party proxy registration service. There is some contention about that because the ICANN did recently propose that there are some restrictions made on private registration and how it works. I suggest that you keep following that. Nothing has been passed yet, but it's definitely something we want to follow. Data clearinghouses, they all have opt-out methods. They're legally required to. They just don't always make them easy to find. For Spokio, People, and ZoomInfo, they just require an email address for verification. Also, it's really small at the bottom, but if you want these slides, that hyperlink at the bottom has a list of pretty much all of the major data clearinghouses and how to opt out of them. For white pages opt-out, you typically need an email address and a phone number. Intellius, I'm not so sure about this one. I want you to take down my personal information, so you're asking me for a copy of my government ID. So again, your mileage may vary in your own personal risk matrix. If you're a very, very public figure, then that might not be something that's a big deal for you. If you're a very private individual, you might not want to be giving out more information about yourself. When you're going to register a new company, and then say either it's an LLC or a new corporation, or it's something that you want to use to register a patent or a trademark, you don't have to do it with your real name. Almost all of the US states allow you to register a fictitious or doing business as name. There are a number of states that don't even require you to register it with them. You can just use it. For the states that do require you to register it, then you can go to the county clerk's office or the state government website, and there's a place for you to create a new fictitious persona for you to do your business through. When you're buying land or property, you don't have to buy it as an individual. You can buy it through a land trust or a holding corporation. That holding corporation you could then have registered with a fictitious name, so that's another level there. But with a land trust, typically what's shown is only the trust information or the lawyer's information. And land trusts have an added bonus in that they keep the sales price of the property private for most states. And what that does is it makes it so your name, address, all of that stuff is not shown on the public county website. I am not a lawyer. I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so please consult a real estate lawyer before you go through setting up a land trust. EXIF data. You can wipe EXIF data from your media files after you download them to your computer. My favorite tool for doing this is Phil Harvey's EXIF tool. It works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And the fun thing about this tool is you don't necessarily, it can delete all of the metadata, all of the location data, but you can also edit it to put false location and time data into it. So that's fun. And I'm sure all the guys who do forensics research in this room want to strangle me for saying that. But I also suggest that for your phones, your iPhones, your iPads, your cameras, you go into those and turn off location tagging or geotagging. A lot of times it's on by default. Okay, so now we're going to get to the fun area. This is like the tinfoil hat, maskurovka, I want to be super secret sort of area. So when you use different or meaningless email accounts, usernames, and passwords, not only does it stop people from being able to use account checkers to check and see if you use the same credentials across other websites, but it acts as a sort of canary in the coal mine. And what that is if you use a very specific email address or unique email address for each account that you sign up for, when you start getting spam or other weird messages to that email address, you know that that company or website has either lost or sold your information. Employing pseudonyms, you don't have to use your real name online. Nobody knows you're a dog online. Also, being wary of cloud services. I don't expect you to raise your hand, but who in here is familiar with the fappening? Yeah, okay, I'll take those last. The fappening, one of the ways that a lot of that information was released was through a bug that Apple said that they did have and patched in iCloud. That allowed enumeration and then access to certain iCloud account information that let people download the nudes of celebrities and non-celebrities. So when you have information that's just for you, or you and your significant other, or you and whoever else that you want to share your dick pics or whatever with, then when you upload it to a cloud service, not only can that be breached, and very well might be at some point in time, but whoever works there, unless they're doing encryption on your device, which most of them aren't, then they'll also have access to all of that. So that's something to think about. Rotating phone numbers and passwords often. Passwords, easy to rotate, especially if you use a password locker. But phone numbers, you can use a service like Fring or Google Voice to go ahead and rotate those numbers as well. And this also acts as canaries. If you start getting weird calls on a certain phone number, then you know anything that you've used that phone number with has possibly leaked that number. Then shredding all of your identifying paper and mail, especially if it's mail that has to do with your health information, or mail that has to do with credit information, new credit cards, things like that. If you want to go one step further, check your local burning laws and then burn it. Doing differentiated information release, saying that you are going on a trip and taking pictures while you're on that trip and uploading them immediately. You don't have to do that. What you can do is hold off for a few months and then upload all of it. That way somebody, like, say, that wants to know where you are when you are, won't necessarily have that information at that time. You can also post false information, pictures of places that you haven't actually been, or evidence of you doing hobbies that you're not actually into. And what that does is it sort of breaks up that pattern of behavior that people will build on you when they're trying to dox you. It also makes it more likely that the information that you're building in profiles conflicts what they're finding in other profiles that you've had. Also, cultivating online personas. The longer that you have fake online personas, the more legit they seem. You want to connect them to different accounts and things like that. What that does is once they start to try and match up different profiles to different usernames and email addresses, there's a lot of conflicting information, a lot of noise. This is something that the Soviets were very good at, is putting in lots and lots of false information, but also a little bit of true information, and that's typically what the term Matskurovka points to. So even if you've done all of this, or are about to do it, and somebody ends up doxing you, what do you do? Well, you of course mitigate the immediate danger. If you think somebody is, or if they're saying that they're going to attack you right now or do something right now, then call 911, contact the police, or you also want to make sure that no matter what, whenever you're doxxed, file a police report. They might not think much of it at the time, but if you have to go and have an investigation later or contact the FBI later, it'll lend a lot of credibility if you already have a standing police report. You want to fully document everything that happened, take screenshots, printouts, backups, and then if there is no active investigation on the doxing, then you want to go ahead and close down the accounts and clean up the information that they were able to get about you. A few years ago, I would say that they're mostly scams and trash, but now the Credit Watch and ID Theft Watch services, there's some pretty legit ones out there. If you do start seeing or have somebody threatening to use your information for identity theft or you're receiving blackmail attempts, contact the FBI. Those are federal offenses. They do take them seriously. This is where Brian Krebs and Ashton Kutcher had a lot of success, is they sat down and had conversations with their local police. They had to do some education and tell them, what doxing is, what swatting is, what the fear is and how it works. They were able to, now what happens is Brian Krebs gets a call on his cell phone whenever somebody calls on a SWAT attempt. They say, is this legitimate? Are you actually in danger? And he's able to, if he can pick up the phone, say, no, this is bogus, everything's fine. And Ashton Kutcher, what they've been doing is the police in that area will send out 2 SWAT cars, not the whole SWAT team, to go check it out and then call back in and say whether or not it's a legitimate situation. I don't know all of the doxing methods out there, and I don't know all of the ways to defend against them. So I'm definitely counting on you all to inform me about those. This is my email address. I would really like you to get in contact with me if you want the slides or if you have other information. I'm especially interested in skip tracing. So there are a lot of methods that private investigators and bounty hunters and the bail bondsmen use to get information about people and where they are and what they're doing. And I'm interested in knowing what their techniques and the services that they use are for those. So if you have that information, please hit me up. All right, questions, comments? Yes?
I understand Brian said. What is Ashton Kutcher that gets
They're jelly. They're jelly. Those kids, they see somebody who's living a life that they want and that they don't have. So I think that's a lot of the motivation. Also, trying to feel better, taking somebody down a notch, putting whatever's going on in their life out there over there with somebody else, that sort of thing. Yes.
This is a more general question. I feel like there is very slowly starting to get growing awareness of doxing and swatting, or at least you're starting to see discussions that show up in social media, as well as discussions of the fact that law enforcement is very frequently, or at least local law enforcement is frequently unprepared
Yes.
to handle this kind of stuff. Would you say that there are now any kind of efforts to try to prepare law enforcement, for example, maybe checking for non-emergency calls, stuff like that, and so do you feel that?
Yes. So I have actually been giving this talk to a lot of law enforcement and government groups. And one of the things that I found is that one group in Arizona I was working with, especially what they're doing is when they get in a call on the non-emergency line that sounds like a swatting attempt, what they'll do is they'll ask for information about, like, okay, where are you? What neighborhood is that? The sort of information that somebody who is swatting somebody else wouldn't have. And then also asking, like, going and getting the address and looking to see if that address has already been doxed, doing a basic Google search. Basically thinking critically about, okay, if this person is actually in danger, what sort of information would they have and be able to give me that maybe a potential swatter couldn't? And then the other thing is not sending out the SWAT team right away. This is a very recent phenomenon. Within the past 5 years, we've seen something like a 4,000% increase in SWAT teams being sent out. And so, they can send a couple of cars over to verify the situation and then call it in. And that's something we see happening in some small precincts in Arizona. Yes, yes. Just recently, there was a kid who was caught and convicted.
What kind of tips can you offer for those of us with younger children to kind of help them now when they're still minors to protect themselves so that they don't get like identity before they get
So this is something that is, controversial because it's a topic of parenting, right? And everybody wants to tell you that they know what's best for your kids. But up to a certain age, you really, I believe, should be monitoring your kids' internet activity. It's the same as you not monitoring them just taking global treks across the world. Because that's essentially what they're doing in the digital sphere. There are ways for people who wouldn't physically have access to them through a digital world to have access to them. And so, like really having conversations, candid conversations about what the dangers are, and having them be mindful about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what the consequences could be. So children up until the age of, I think it's 19 for women and about 21, 22 for men, part of their brain, the part of the brain that can really understand and grok long-term consequences of current actions hasn't fully developed. So to think to yourself that, oh, well, if I just explain it to them, they'll be able to make that decision critically for themselves, they physically can't for most neurotypical human beings. So you want to go ahead and monitor that yourself. There are lots of software that do that. You, of course, want to check the security track record for any software that you use. Then it just gives you a report of like where they went, how long they spent, and things like that. And what I do is, for my son, is I let him know. I don't do it surreptitiously. I let him know that this is what I'm doing. And that when he's 18 and he can get his own device and pay for it himself, then of course he doesn't have to worry about any of that. But I also let him know why I'm doing it. So, does that answer your question?
Sort of. Is it
okay?
Is it possible, like, have you heard of situations where maybe you set up like a fake identity that you use and then just ditch that when you're 18 or something like that?
That's actually a good idea. If while you're a kid, you're not actually putting your real information out there. The only problem there is, even if you're using a false identity and they're in a chat room or playing a game online, if somebody asks them, hey, what's your name, or hey, where do you live, especially if they started to build up trust or rapport with them, chances are a small child is going to just give that information out without thinking about it. Any other questions? Yes?
How does the police send out SWAT team?
So it really depends on the culture in that current police station, and it also depends on what policies they have on the books. There isn't a sort of one-size-fits-all answer. Different areas have different levels of militarization and different levels of, I guess, wanting to send out the full force of their brigade. So it really comes down to having a conversation with your local police about that. A lot of times they'll talk about their percentages. If they don't want to talk about it, you can also do a freedom of information request. It really comes down to how, I don't have any tactful way to say this, how aggressive that they are, or how full of power that they're feeling typically. There is some national statistics on which are the worst offenders that you can find online, but there isn't a way to just say, oh yes, I know this group is doing this right now and this group is doing that right now. And there are no across-the-board, top-down regulations or restrictions on how often they can or cannot send them out. So there's no enforcement there. And again, communication and education are the biggest weapons here. It's even if you think that your local police, or the police across the U.S. aren't doing the things that you want them to do in the ways you want them to do, being contrarian is not going to get any movement forward. It's having conversations and educating them. All right. Well, thank you all.